Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going this Bava Metzia daf Kuf Dalid. We're going to begin on Kuf Gimel Amid Beis by the Mishnah at the bottom. Says Mastis. Hamakabel Sada Mechavero. You have a person who is a Makablin, as we saw in the beginning of this parak, that a person could be an Orus, a sharecropper, in which there is a deal that that person will have to give a certain proportion of the produce that they make in the field that year, half, third, fourth, depending on what's stipulated. There's also another person who's called Chachirus, in which all profits go to him, and he pays a set amount for the use of the field. So if this is the person, and Vihi Beis HaShlachim, and in this field is considered a Beis HaShlachim, which means it needs extra watering, or Beis Elon, or there's trees. So Yamash Hamayin, let's say this water well dried up, now, or V'nixas Elon, or the tree got cut down somehow, so the worker would have benefited from these items. So the question is, since there was this agreement, so the question is, do we deduct it from the arrangement? So the Mishnah says, min chachuroi. It does not get deducted from this set amount. So again, the Mishnah clearly says it's talking about a case of chachirus. However, im amro, but if he was specific and said, chachali sada beis hashlachin zu, that I want this field in which has this water, ostei beis elon zeh. So he's specifying that I want this Beis Elon, this field which has trees. So in that case, Yavashamayim v'nixas Elon, then menakul ben chachura. Then it would be deducted from his chachura, from the amount, because he was specific that this is what he wanted. Says Rashi, Beis HaShlachim karki aveisha, of dry land, delo daya b'mei geshamim. It's not enough rainwater. And this well in this field, it actually helps it get water down. So it has tremendous utility. So says Rashi, min chachurai im kiblu mimedo bechirus kach v'kach kurin l'shana, that I'm going to pay you a certain amount for this amount of land. Dimikora, then, and that's the original agreement. It doesn't matter how successful or not he is. Well, gali daite demishima'ayin o ilan tvei tafila bicha richusai. Notice he would still need to pay him out. He said that he would rent the field out for, because he didn't specify. Okay. So the Gemara asks like this: Hey Chidami, what exactly is this case? Ilim diavash naharaba. Are we talking about? We're talking about this large river that all the water wells everywhere all get dried up. So why in the narration do we say it doesn't get deducted? No, makas medinahi. This sharecropper should say it's makas medina, and as we learn later on in our parak on Daf Kuf Hey, Rashi says, so if, let's say, there's some type of blight or there's locusts that destroy the crop, says Rashi, that it does get deducted. So therefore, if it's a makas medina, it should be deducted. So how come the Rashi says it's not deducted? That can't be the case then. Only a small amount of water. It wasn't a makas medina. The Amr Lane, he can say, as we continue to Kuf Dalad Manalef, that you need to bring water now in a pitcher, and therefore it's not going to be deducted. Amr Papa, Hani Tarte Masniyasa Kamaisa. These two first statements, Mishkachas La Bein Bechach Ronusa, Bein Bekabonusa. It's possible that it could be either case. Again, chachranusas, you give a set amount of money to the landowner and you work the field like a rental. And kablanus is that it's like an orus, a sharecropper pays a percentage. So, what is this referring to? Says Rashi, Yiksor, Lakor, Yakor, Dechol Ma Sheyesh Litan B'Kablonos, Yesh Litan B'Charichos. So the first Mishnah in the parak talked about we have to go bust the minig. So the minig is to harvest. Do you harvest? If it's to uproot everything completely, you have to do minig Medina, and that could apply to either case. Mekan v'elech. However, everything else from this point, Disa b'kablunusa, leisa b'chachrenusa. Disa b'chachrenusa, leisa b'kablunusa. So some of these cases are mutually exclusive. It's only talking about one and not the other. And as we just saw in the Seifa, this mission is clearly talking about a situation of chachrenusa. Im amelu chachorli, because that's the language here. So if he specifies and says this field which has water, so therefore it will be deducted. In fact, why should it be deducted? Let the landowner say that Shema ba'alma amrulach. You are only speaking about the name, says Rashi. Kachi nikres. This is what it's called. You were just mentioning that this is the name of this land. It doesn't mean that the land has to have actual water in it. This land has to have trees in it. And if not, you could deduct it. No, maybe you shouldn't deduct it because he's just mentioning this is its name. How do we see this svar? Milatanya, didn't we have to learn also in Bava Basra? Haimel Chavero, person this was friend, base Korafa Nimoich, I'm selling to you a specific land, which its name is called base core offer. Alpha Shein by El Latech, even though it's only half a core, which is obviously much less than a base core, Higiyoi, it's still considered to be a valid sale. Shulmacho El Shema, because he's only really selling him the name of base core offer. Base core, of course, that has to be its name. Now, for that matter, also Karmanig Moichlocha, if he says a vineyard I'm selling to you, Alpha Shein Bo Gofanim, even though it doesn't have grapevines, Higiyu, it's still a sale. Shulmacho El Shema, because he's just selling it based on its name. Of course, the Hudesri Karma has to be actually called that. Pardes anymore, I'm selling you an orchard. Alpha Shein Bo Remainim, even if it doesn't have pomegranates, which I guess is one of the fruits that was in an orchard, it's still a sale. When Alma, what do we see from all these cases? I know we could have just brought down one, but we bring down the whole thing. Shma, he could say Shma bi Alma. Hachinami, namely Shma bi Alma. So the question is, why should it be deducted in the Sefer Mishnah? Well, we should say that it should not be deducted. How do we know he's saying anything other than its name, that he's specifying this water, this specific field? So Amar Shmuel Kasha. So we give two answers. Ha di Amarle Macher l'chaycher, the Macher, the one who is the seller, is saying to the chaycher, the one who's working the field, he says Ha di Amarle chaycher, and Ha di Amarle chaycher Macher. And the other one is the chaycher is speaking to the macher. Amarle macher l'chaycher shma be'alma. So the macher, who is the seller, says to the chaycher that shma be'alma amarle. All I'm selling you or giving to you is a land that has this name. Amarle chaycher macher kapeda. The chaycher in our Mishnah is makbid. Says Rashi, Snei beis hashlachim ani macher l'cha. If the seller says it, then it could, in fact, he could claim Shema ba'alma. But over here, it's the chaycher who's saying, no, I'm makbid. He's specifying it. And therefore, because of that, the din is that it is deducted. Both cases, actually, it's the owner of the field that's speaking. Medikarmer is zeh. The fact he says this, that's mashma, that it's really the owner speaking. So machlal, but we can deduce dekoy begavoh. The fact that it says zeh, we can understand it must be that they're in the field right now. Skinan. So why does he say beshlachim? The way it is right now. In other words, they're specifically in this field, and therefore, obviously, it's talking about this field, which is a Beis HaShlachim. And therefore, because they said zeh, this, which you can point to, so therefore, that's the reason why we're going to say that it will be deducted. Question 1. Beis HaShlachim Zu Yavish Shamayim Menachum Min Chachurai. It is deducted. So if it's deducted, so my Shna Medasanya Omer Beis Korafra Nimoichalach. So how come over there it's not? So this is how he writes it. Armali Machir L'Chaycher. The owner said Shema Ba'al Marmalay and Chaychel Machir Kpeda. Over our Mishnah he says he's Machmit. Or since they said the word Zu. It must be that they're actually on the field. It must be that they're mamish on the field, which I think is going to be the same question as TA30. Let's see. Madul Armin and the Shema Ba'alma. Yes, exactly the same question. And Shani Hacha Yermli Choichel Macher Choichli Beis HaShlachim does have a kapeda. V'loy ka'omer lo machel choicher. O demairi the korban gavoy v'loy hayel lo oimer beis hashlachim mid oimer shmamina kapeda. B'ritzaino bebeis hashlachim k'dekayma hashta. And he's saying, I want it the way it is right now. Okay. Okay, let's continue. Let's see the next mission. Says Masnis. So again, you have this person who's involved in kablonos, and before we see this, look at this Taisus over here. Dibra Matkal Hani Trey Masnisan. The Afgab de Kashem Shechalukim Betvua Leisa Becharichus Mikomakam Iker Milsa Hainu Ratio Mairi Ben Becharichus Ben Bekablonos. So it actually, if we remember, the first part of the Mishnah before did make a distinction between kablonos and charichos, as Taisus points out, but the ikr of the Mishnah is talking about both. Now let's see the Mishnah. The hoivira. So let's say you have this field that you're using, and the guy didn't do anything. It says Rashi Shulchar Shulozara. You just decided, no, I'm not going to work the field. So Shomnos Akama Ruya Lasois, Vanoislo. So basically the din is, we have to figure out how much this person actually would have potentially been able to have worked if he worked a normal amount on this field. Because this is what's written. That if you just sit around, don't do anything, so you still have to pay. Now obviously this is not talking about a case of charichos, because you pay anyway. So we don't care if you don't work the field, because you still have to pay the same amount of money. That's what Rashi says over here, Kagon bekablonos. Why it says Kagon? Shekibel lemexer shlish ravia avo bechach ronus lo shaycha. Right? There's no, it's not shaykh to bring that situation, because you're going to get that money anyway. Says the Gemara. So Rameir hayadarish loshen hedget. Rameir was accustomed to darshan, which is called loshen hedget. In other words, even though it was not a takanas chachamim, he would still say that we have to follow the language of the common folk. The Sanya. So the din is that you have to do payment. You have to provide payment if you decided not to work, and this is considered to be the situation. Rabbi Yehuda Hayadar Shlosh handed as well. Because again, Rav Meir is the Stam Mishnah. He's like Rav Meir, so it must be that's Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Hayadar Shlosh handed the Sani Yehuda Eimer Adamevi carbon Asher al Ishtay, that a person has to provide a carbon usher for his wife. So Rashi says, Shu chayev a carbon. Let's say his wife is chayev to bring carbon either leidasa, she gave birth, Sarata, let's say she had saras. The imhu asher, and he happens to be a rich guy. So ein yochel loimer he ein laklum, but he potter carbon ani. She can't say, well, my wife is broke, right? She spends all her money, or again, according to the concept that everything the woman has is really her husband's, or right, doesn't belong specifically to her. So the fact that he has money doesn't mean anything, because maybe she's poor, therefore he doesn't have to provide for an expensive carbon. We're talking about, say, carbon olav yared. So he wouldn't have to give an animal; he can give flour. No, he still has to provide. He's mechuyev to give the top shelf carbon, if you will. V'chein kol carbon v'carbon she chayeves, any carbon. Shekak kaisela, this is what's written. Achrayis t'isla chalai min kadamat dana. From before the marriage, he's mechuyev to provide. He's mechuyev to have to give and pay for all of her karbanos. So it means that even though this took place before, and Rashi says, what does mean kol carbon she chayeves? Dulu b'neder nedava. Going carbon zivta v'ashim v'chatas sholeha. So Rashi actually excludes certain karbanos. A neder nedava, that doesn't apply. However, when it comes to these other karbanos, which are obligations, so that in fact you would have to do. If you look in Tosas, first of all, when it says Darshlosh and Hedjit Lashonos Shotiknu Chachamim Lichtov El Hedyotos Hurgo Lekaisvan. Again, things that they would just be accustomed to write. So look at this, some of this Tosas over here. Hachigar Sinan, Adamevi Carbon Asher Al Ishto V'chein Kol Karbano Shechayeves Shekak Kosav, etc. Perish Kol Karbano Shahisa Chayeves, all the karbanos which she's obligated Kodim Shenise Slo Yavi Ba'avura. He has to pay for all of her karbanos. And it says over here, Afil Chovos Shikadmil Nesuin. And even when it came things that were before the marriage. But Davgar Barkona Shein Chayva Lekaparasa. As you said, only karbanos similar to Rashi, things where there's actual kapara. Going Leid, Ziva, Saras, all these different things. Those apply. And then it says, Davka Bahanis Shesrich Lahevi of Karbonos Shenadav and Nadva Koidim Nisuin, anything that was done before the marriage, a neder and a davar before, then he would not be Mechuyev b'davar. So that's mashma, maybe it's davar pashit, that if it's anything that she does afterwards, he would be mechuyev. Okay, and the rest of the Taisus. Hil hazakin haridar and hedjid the sanya anchi el Cassandria shaya mikanchines nishaysayim. Beautiful, they would get married. However, v'shas knisas l'chuba, before the consummation of the marriage, they already had kedushin. Boina cheren, other people would come, and they would abduct her. So they want to say that her children will be mamzerim. Bring to me the ksuva that was written at the day of Erison. So Havilu ksuvah they did. Umasah Shkasman has written the following: only when you enter chuppah Havilu into be my wife. And therefore they're not mamzerim. Says Rashi, the kedusheim al manaskein. So, and probably, it's probably not a coincidence, that's probably why it was written that way in the Ksuba, in this Ksuba's Erison, to say that even though it's a Kedushin, it's not really Chal until Chuppah. So therefore, anything that happens before Chuppah, they're not married. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda, Rishuvin Karcha, Hayadar Shloshen Hedget. The stand Rishuvin Karcha Imer, Hamalve, Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yeshuvin Karcha, okay. The stand Yehuda ben Karcha, Rishuvin Karcha Imer, Hamalve Schaveroi, if you lend money to your friend, Lo Yam Shechenena Yois Mechayvo, the mashkon should not be more than the debt itself. Shekak Kaisavo is what's written. Tashlumta T'isla Chalai, the payment that is upon me, Kol Kabali Dichi, anything equivalent of this. Time to Kasav because you wrote it this way. You will Kasav if you didn't write this, Kanya, the Malva wouldn't be able to be koinit. B'hayim Rabbi Yochanan Mashkana v'Heishiv lo Hamashkanu Meis Shomto Mial B'nei Banav. But we learned that when it comes to a someone who returns a mashkoin to the loiva, and then the loiva dies, Shomto Mial Gabi Banav. Giving it back to the loiva is a favor, and he could even get it back from the assignment even without a star. So what do you mean it's all totally in having a star? Even without a star, it's clear that he's able to get it back. Says Rashi, Shonas amashkum v'kaiselo zeh b'shtar yulacha kol tashuman olai le'poyer mimenu demei mashkan zeh v'yimashkan yaisol al-chayiv nimsu gaiv shulkadin. That's the whole problem, is you're going to end up taking a mashkan which is more than the loan, which is shulkadin. But the only reason why this works is that if it's written that way. If it wasn't written, then you can't. But what are you talking about? If you return this mashkon to the lova, and then the lova dies, it says Shana Gabi Bonov. You can still get it back. That's clear even without a star. So what do you mean it's only because you wrote this, even without a star? As we continue to Kuf Dalad Mabez, Ahani Ksiva Ligiroyoim. It still helps when it comes to the deduction of money. Says Rashi, Im Yichasu Demei Hamashkon Shishtamish Boy Haloiva. So therefore, it at least works in that the mashkun, there could be a depreciation or deduction, and therefore that is the benefit of having this star. In the situation where the ksuba is like a loan, the husband can collect this loan. What does that mean? Says Rashi, Nifras mimenu kishnas armonis garsha. Let's say there's a ksuba, and then his wife, they get divorced, or she's a widow. There's a widow. Keder shabal chayiv nifra kechol hakosa b'shtar milva kigain shekaisim ba kamo shonu kaisim achrayis dana kabos aloi. So the husband is able, just like a loan, to be able to collect from this ksuba. So again, let's say, for example, her father writes this, so it's like it's a loan, and therefore the husband is able to collect this dowry. Let's say the custom is to, as Rashi says, b'shvil kavod, they double it, so then you collect half. So let's say you're supposed to get 200, but they want to make it look impressive, so they write 400, but the truth is they doubled it, so therefore you get half, which is the 200, which is what was really agreed upon. Nahar Beloy Gobo Tilta, Nar Beloy collected Tilta, third. Mareimag Magli Nami Shvacha. He also collected the Shvach. What does that mean? Kol Mashay Kaisef. Whatever was written on it. In other words, even if apparently you could maybe say he was kaifel, that they doubled it as exaggeration, he wouldn't collect half, he would get the whole thing. What are you talking about? I thought you only collect half. So how could you collect the whole thing that's written? You know that it was written double. So in the event where the man made a kinyan, says Rashi, Avi Habas, from the father of this daughter, this man that wrote this ksuba. So if the person was kainit, made some kinyan, so therefore, even though it's we know that it was really supposed to be half, but the fact that the kinyan was made, it was understood that he can collect the entire thing. Okay. So that's how we answer that. Hadolo kanimine. Ravina exaggerated also. The cost of Liberaten, he wrote for his daughter also more. Amrule nikdimine, so he said, so let's make a kinyan, damar. So Amrulahu, imikna lo michbol, lo mikna. So Ravina is a huge Talmud Chacham, and he said, I'll tell you what, if you make a kinyan, I'm not going to double the amount, because then you'll get double the amount. But if I double the amount, I won't let you make a kinyan, so this way you'll have to collect half. So therefore, either way, you're only going to get the amount that I want you to get. He said, give 400 zuz to my daughter. Now, as Rashi says, this is a person who is dying, and it's Metzava machmas misahoya. So the question is, this guy's not around anymore. He died, to be able to understand what exactly he meant. When he said 400, do we have to actually write down 800? And then this way, without a kinyan, they'll collect 400. When he says 400, do we write 400? Therefore, he'll end up getting only 200. So when he said the amount of 400, did he mean that's how much I want my daughter, how much I want to actually give? Or I want it written 400, so I'm actually only going to give 200. So Ravashi Chazin, we see. Give to her, then you have to write 800, because you'll end up giving 400. He said, write it down, dinan masan. Then, of course, we have to give only 200, because he said, write 400, and half of 400 is 200. Some say, we evaluate. If he says it's for the collection of the ksuba, then we actually will say we should write down 800. The omer biksuvasa masan. He just means to write down 400, and therefore it'll only be 200 collected. But actually, we're not going to make such a distinction. Loshna the omer liksubasa, loshna the omer biksubasa. This poor guy's dying, and he's going to know the difference between liksubasa and biksubasa. It really just means 200. Until he specifies havula, stama. If he says havula, then we'll perhaps understand it differently. Ahu gavra. So is a person dekabil ara mechavari, and as we've been discussing, this person takes land from his friend, and he's going to work the land. Amri says like this: Imo varnala, I'm going to be a hard worker, and I'll tell you this: if for whatever reason I don't work the land and I leave it fallow, yavinu lach al pezuz, I'm going to give you $1,000, which is an absorbent amount of money, 1,000 zuz. Over, he taka left it over, but he only left over tilta, a third of the field. He worked beautifully 2/3 of the field. The question is, what's the status now of this last third? So we have to divide, since he said 1,000, but he did work 2/3 of the field. He didn't work 1/3. So he has to give a third of 1,000, namely 333 1/3. Rounding. No. When he said 1,000 zuz, which is such an absorbent amount of money, it's such an exaggeration, you know that this is not really what he meant. There was no smichas das over here. No one actually thought he was being serious, and therefore he doesn't have to give anything. Well, Rava, so according to you, Rava, who says smachas is not kanya, our Mishnah says that if he doesn't work the land, he does have to pay. So how come over here he does? So over there, he wasn't exaggerating. It's just that you have to pay that amount. Was the rules. Since he said something above and beyond the amount he would have produced anyway, he was just, again, exaggerating. So you have a person that, again, accepted to work the land, and it was understood that his purpose was to plant sesame seeds. And instead, zorachite, he decided to plant wheat. Now, there's two important points to note about sesame. Says Rashi, kablanus hoisa was zara shumshmin v'hen yikarin min achita. At least back in those days, sesame seeds were proportionally more expensive than wheat. So it makes sense why you'd want the guy to work sesame seeds, because there'll be more money involved. However, Rashi says, the problem is it depletes the ground more. So it's like a double-edged sword. On one hand, you make more money with sesames, but the ground ends up losing its nutrients faster. So he ended up instead using the wheat, in which the wheat doesn't deplete the ground, but he also doesn't make as much money. But interestingly enough, of the chite kashumshimi, that he made enough wheat comparable to that of the sesame. So Savar Rav Kahana Lemar, he thought maybe Menachile Chasha Da'ara. The fact is that he was supposed to pay a certain amount of money, understanding that using sesame is going to really mess up the ground. But now that he was able to produce the same amount of money, because he produced, let's say, a massive amount of wheat, but it didn't deplete the ground as much, so maybe the sharecropper shouldn't have to pay as much. That could be deducted. So Amr le Rav Ashi or Rav Kahana, no. Amri Inshi, people say, Chach Sha'ara, let the land get weak, v'lo lichush mara, and not let the owner get weak. In other words, he wants profit, and it should not be lessened. So the owner doesn't give back the difference had the land been weakened. In other words, he wants the money. The owner of the land wants his money. So he's not going to have to pay less. He could say, I'd rather the land be weaker and me getting the amount of money that I was originally having. So it's not going to be deducted. Question 2a. Hamakabel sadal azra shumshimi v'zar chiti. Of the chiti kashumshimi, he makser bal habayis ma nistakir deloy chachsha sadeu. And the answer is in makser. He doesn't give it back. Okay, let's continue. Hahu gavid kabel aru l'shumshimi. Again, same guy, or let's say not, that he ends up making this deal. That he's going to work the land for sesames. And again, sesame is more expensive. You make more money off of it, but it ruins the ground faster than wheat. Zar chiti. Then again, this guy planted wheat. Of the chiti tfeimin shumshimi. Actually, the price was even more than that of sesame. So Sab Rabbeinu Meimer Yoivle Shivcha de Beni Beni. Maybe the owner should actually pay more money now and give some extra money to the sharecropper, because now, for whatever reason, wheat became more expensive, and therefore, because of that, he should benefit from that interesting business decision. Similarly, Rav Acha B'Deithu Ravina ought to what? Hu ashmach or lo ashmacha. The ground, what we say that he benefited, the ground didn't benefit. So the landowner gets more too in this situation. In other words, in this situation, what ended up happening? Let's go straight into Rashi. Yoivle bal karka menachlo mechari chasai v'lun yito el kadei shir demei shumshim shi royal asos kafi shezeh garmo zeh shvach. So again, what happened was he planted wheat, and of the chitit fame in a shumshimin. So he thought that yoivle shivcha the veni veni, the owner should give the difference. So he says, what is it? Is it only he made a profit? The land didn't make a profit. In other words, the fact that the land now was also not depleted. So look at question 2b. Of the chitit fame shumshimi he makser bal bias shvach de beni veni. Does the Baal Bias give back the profits in between? So, Ein Makser, the din is that he does not have to give it back. Okay, we're going to stop here. Maybe we have one more question. Adkan.